Into this. Just finished watching a video. I think it's on Priest, one of the HOI, I think House of Israel. That would be probably as an acronym, HOI videos on the YouTubes by a one named Priest, Zabak, right? And it's the clip called, Selassie Sister. About to get into that. Selassie, with how Selassie spelled is Salassie. And it's a very interesting clip. I almost didn't want to really even check it out because it's like, you kind of hear the same kind of COINTEL, kind of responses by so-called black Hebrews and so-called Hebrew Israelites against the King of Kings upon the throne of David. And it's like many of the black Hebrews and Hebrew Israelites are again, in a sense, missing the boat. They're missing the boat on His Majesty. They're missing the boat. This is like the time of Noah, the time of Noah, and they're missing the boat. And we're not saying that what many of the things that they are saying are not true based on the scriptures concerning the lost sheep, who we are, right? But then there are some areas that they really don't know what they just don't know. And that's the most difficult thing when you're speaking to somebody that doesn't know one thing, but they don't even want to learn it. And in the clip, called, Selassie Sister, I think it's Selassie Sister. Stay tuned. We're going to touch on, because there's a couple of points that we need to address. In fact, while I was watching the video at first, I think they were speaking about, their false doctrine concerning Joseph being the father of Jesus or Yeshua, who they call Yahushai, incorrectly, pointing the Hebrew, but that's also another issue. And you begin to say, well, how do we, in a sense, seem to come from one root? I'm speaking about us over here in the same diaspora who identify ourselves as Ethiopian Hebrews. And then we come to the modern black Hebrews. Well, something went on during those 50s and 60s and 70s. And then, oh, yeah, that's right. There was COINTELPRO to stop the rise of the black Messiah. And as I've been teaching and even seeking to demonstrate and to even articulate and prove by the evidence, the stopping the rise of the black Messiah was to stop the rise of that black Messiah consciousness. But the real point man is the conquering line of the tribe of Judah, Haile Selassie the first, Kedamawi Haile Selassie. And anyway, I just want to say a couple of words on that. I know some people say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Selassie is Ham and is Hamite, and they'll go to the Bible and they'll point to certain things that we're not dismissing as true. But when we start to really get into the evidence of what we're saying, everyone knows that the Amhara, right, and the Tigray, actually the Tigray, the ancient Tigrayan, because later on Amhara come out of that when you know the true history. And this is the other half of the story, and the connection with, Negus, Dawid or Melech, right? David and Melech, Shlomo, Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba, and David having a son named Solomon having a son named David. And then they also want to dismiss that as well. So there's a lot of points of false doctrine that it's ironic, because when it comes to identifying who we are based on the scripture, maybe that's the easy part, to really recognize that what other people, right, could, the Messiah, the anointed, even Christ in his kingly character come to, and they would turn their backs on him. What other people? You see, so when we want to identify black people, just basically, we just take the Bible as a basic book. And we say, okay, this basic book known as the Bible, which is a very important book in the whole world, but we'll say especially in the Western civilization of things. And we start to look into it and see, well, who do these curses for disobedience apply to and why? why did Israel get in the situation that it did? Just because you recognize that you are Israel. This is what the word says, not all who are of Israel are Israel, and it speaks of the Israel of Ha-Elohim, speaking about the Israel of the power, right? They're missing the boat once again. You know, it's just so very interesting, man. And it's not to be even getting, it's not even about emotions. You know, it's really saying, well, what could we say, right, to explain and to, but we know some folks don't want to get it, just like, I mean, we could study this throughout previous history and time, just don't want to get it. They have that connection with us as being Israel and themselves as being either black Hebrews or Hebrew Israelites, because some will tell you, well, we're not black. Some might identify a little bit with Africa. Others say, well, no, absolutely no Africa, you know, and they say, you know, we're not from Africa. And we like, is there a laugh track somewhere? We're not from Africa. You mean originally speaking as a people? That's true. But they're acting like, well, 70 AD happened, and then we fled into Africa, which many of the Hebrew and the Jewish and the real black Hebrew and Judahite tribes did flee into Africa. Some crossed that river, the river of Ethiopia. We find that in the scripture as well. While those who were able to connect with the Davidic kingdom. But you have to remember that with many of the Israelites and with many of the so-called Jews, they had turned their backs on the covenant of David. So it's really ironic because there's a nostalgic feeling, but they're not recognizing that they are the seed of their fathers, right? That's what they ask you, well, who's your father? So the Selassie sister, this is kind of getting up ahead of I and I self. I want to actually get the clip. You know, I want to go into the clip because there's a couple of points there. In fact, after I watched it almost, I'll say more than 3/4 of the way through, I was like, I'm gonna have to do something on this. You know, and it was like at first I saw it and I said, you know, cause you know, like, you know, they'd be clowning on the King of Kings. It's just like the Israelites, right? Or the Jews, right? We're speaking about black people now. Right? In the time of HaMashiach, how they missed the boat with Yeshua. I mean, they missed the boat then. Right? And in these latter days and times, he says he would resurrect his people because once again, they can either hear the good news of the King of Kings, Haile Selassie, the first upon the throne of David, or once again, they can miss the boat, right? Once again, they can miss the boat. And what's so ironic is that many of our so-called black and Negro ancestors, you know, even though they might have been, in a whole different world compared to us, you know, we have access to information. They even did not doubt the obvious, right? And did not doubt the history of who His Majesty is and what he represents. But now in this post-COINTELPRO nigger generation, knowing about stop the rise of the Black Messiah. So some say it was King. Some say it was Malcolm X. No. It was and is Haile Selassie the first. And once again, the Jews, the lost sheep of the house of Israel, are missing the boat on His Majesty.